Being raised there in the little community of High Cliff where the train wreck actually occurred, I was raised around people who were first-hand responders, that they saw this event happen. So let's kind of roll back. It's kind of hard for us to do 80-something years later, but let's try to go back and get ourselves in the mindset of the country in 1944. The entire overarching lifestyle of America at that time was geared toward the war effort. There were 16 million men and women in service of the United States in uniform, overseas or in America. The whole industrial complex of the United States was geared toward winning World War II. Produce. Get men into combat as fast as you can, get replacements there. It was really truly an astounding time. It's really kind of hard for us to imagine, even though I grew up on these tales and grew up around so many World War II veterans. So we're right at the height of the time that this troop train wreck happened. D-Day had just occurred 1 month earlier on June 6, 1944. Europe was really needing men to replace all those who were wounded and killed, as well as the Pacific Theater, and let us not forget the India, China, Burma Theater, which a lot of historians kind of leave out. But they needed men just as fast as they could in replacements. So L&N Railroad, they sent troop train number 47 up to Fort Benjamin, Harrison, Indiana. And they picked up 1,000 soldiers that day. The train was 16 cars long. It had an engine and a tender. It had baggage cars, it had cook cars, and it had the troop Pullman cars. And all of these young soldiers, they got aboard that train, and no doubt, they were concerned. They were concerned about where they were going to go. Were they going to go to Europe? Were they going to go to Japan? What was going to happen to them? Were they going to be wounded? Were they going to be killed? Most of them had never been away from their families. It's hard to imagine what a trying time they were facing. But again, fate, this overarching event of World War II, had control of everybody. They really had no control. Neither did the train crew. So the train crew had orders to get those recruits to Camp Croft, South Carolina, just as fast as they could. That was a training base that served as a replacement crew. That's where they sent soldiers all over the world where they were needed after finishing out. So I don't know the entire number of states that these soldiers were from, but let's say most of the Midwestern states that these soldiers had mounted up and they headed south. So here they go. They ride pleasantly for most of the day across Indiana, through Ohio, through Kentucky. And it's probably kind of a yawnful ride, going across the flat farmland and so forth. And then about dusky dark, they left Kentucky, just north of High Cliff. And that's a long straightaway. And having lived there by the tracks for all of my life, I sort of know how these trains operate. Engineers tend to let them roll down that long, probably a mile and a half or 2 mile straight coming out of Kentucky before you hit what our postcards, if you look at old postcards around the Jellico area, they call that area the Tennessee Rockies, the Cumberland Palisades. It's an extremely rugged canyon that's cut down through Pine Mountain. It's a water gap through the mountain, and you really enter some curvy. You drive the road between here and Jellico, it's pretty curvy. The railroad is very curvy. So here comes Engineer Rollins and his firemen. They lickety-split. I don't know exactly their disposition, where they were supposed to lead the train or whatever. It's kind of been a common legend that they were supposed to be relieved in Corbin. A new crew was supposed to get on the train, a fresh crew. However, they were not relieved, so Engineer Rollins headed on down through there. And people say, oh, he was so mad that he didn't get relieved, and he was just running this engine furiously. However, we will cover some points that kind of beg to differ. But the whole way, this is a very dear artifact to me that was donated to the library by the Rollins family, Engineer Rollins family, a few years ago. And this is a little wing vent window that was on the locomotive. And you could turn this in and out and look out. So this is the actual window that Engineer Rollins was looking through as he was coming in through there. So the facts are, as best as the investigation could determine, that Engineer Rollins went into the first steep curve in the Tennessee Rockies at too high a rate of speed. The official report says he went into that curve, which was rated at 35 miles an hour. He was doing 45. The 16-car train was known to be overweight for that engine and what he was supposed to be pulling. But it didn't matter in the overarching, get those men there, get it done, get the job done. He had his orders. And you can see it in the report that's in your little flyer there. One of the lines in it that really grabs me is his speed indicator was inoperable. So how was Engineer Rollins to really know how fast he was going into that curve? He was operating under some challenging situations. He was obviously tired. He obviously had some mechanical difficulties, and he had orders to get there really fast. In the aftermath of the wreck, they also determined that the trucks, the front trucks of that series of locomotives in steep curves were not known to slew correctly, and that is a word that the railroad uses the way they turn. So it was a combination of things that got them. The overarching drama of World War II, speed, fatigue, mechanical ambiguities, and it just fate clutched those 1,000 soldiers and that train crew there. Unfortunately, 34 soldiers ended up perishing in the wreck, and Engineer Rollins and the fireman lost their life as well. A very personal connection to the wreck is my father was a 17-year-old boy in Highcliffe living at that time. And people living next to the railroad, they get used to the coming and goings of trains, and they knew all the local train schedules. So when they heard this train blow in Kentucky that was not on a regular schedule, they knew it was a troop train. So most everybody in the community got out and they waved at the soldiers going through. And I always think how happy those soldiers must have been seeing some friendly civilians there at Highcliffe waving at them, but little did they know, just a mile down the track, that fate was going to get them. So after my father actually waved at the men on that train and was getting ready to go on to his house, he heard this huge noise. So as a curious young man, he ran right up the tracks to see what was going on. So what he found was absolute pandemonium. He was probably one of the very first local people on the scene. So what happened after that was about a 3-day rescue effort, which involved people from La Follette and Clinton and in Kentucky and all over the area. All of these people came together to rescue these soldiers because many were trapped in there for several days. One of the things it brought to light was, people sort of knew there was an Oak Ridge, but all of a sudden in little old Highcliffe, Tennessee, in a community of about 200 people at that time, there's not 50 of us there now, but all of a sudden an MP company from Oak Ridge, Tennessee shows up. And they take over the situation. And they start transporting soldiers to Oak Ridge Hospital. Well, nobody knew Oak Ridge had a hospital or an MP at that time. So that was kind of a neat aspect of it. That kind of opened things up. But anytime my father and I would be sitting there on the riverbanks fishing close to that, he would tell me a lot of stories of that. Sadly, he would tell me how he looked at the surface of the water. He could see the engineer trapped down underneath the water, and his hair was waving at the surface. And you can see several of these accounts on, if you ever watched the Heartland series. Troop Train number 47 is an episode. I would recommend that everybody watch that. Okay, I grew up listening to all of those tales that local people told me about that, and I sort of thought I had outpaced the troop train history, and then, as Nancy said, in 2004 I sat down at Jellico Library as director, and I was really surprised at how many men in the last several years and families would show up at the library and say, we're not here, we're not from here. Do you know anything about the troop train wreck that happened in 1944? We would like to see where my husband was injured or where I lost a buddy or whatever. So I have a lot of personal first-hand accounts of people I've met over the years. Three of those people are Mr. Art Burns. He used to actually come and stay with my parents a couple of days every year around the anniversary, and he would tell me his tales of that. He spent 100 days in the hospital after that wreck, and he was never considered fit for military service again. So he ended his military career right there in the Clear Fork River. Mr. Dick Stadler was another one who came back for years. He would tell us lots of first-hand accounts. But one of my favorites, who came back every year for many, many years, he sadly passed away in 2019. But this humble little looking fella is one Mr. Clarence L. Eckstein. He was one of the most interesting people I ever met in my entire life. He was truly a fascinating character, and I feel so blessed that we crossed paths. One day I was sitting at my library desk, and I could look out right at the front doors of the main street, and I saw this little fella coming across with a cane, like this, coming across Main Street. Now, I'm not making fun of him because he's done in his late 80s or early 90s by that time. And there's this whole gaggle of people behind him. There's these 6 of his daughters, there's a couple of sons, there's grandkids, there's his wife, and they're all, staying sort of a step behind Mr. Eckstein. And he comes in and introduces himself and wants to know if I know anything about the troop train wreck. So we really become good friends. Not only was Mr. Eckstein nearly killed there in the troop train wreck, he went on to serve in Europe where he was gravely wounded. He was so taken aback by all of the comrades he lost along the way on the march to Germany that he stayed for like 3 years after World War II, helping to exhume and repatriate the remains of his comrades and see that they came home. Really kind of touching. He worked 30 years for the United States Postal Service, had 10 children and all those kids and grandkids and great-grandkids. He was still driving a senior citizens bus in Salina, Ohio into his 90s when he would come and talk to me. He was the chairman of his 11th Armored Division, AMVET's post there in Ohio. He was just a truly fast, but just as humble as could be. So I really, truly feel blessed by some of the people I've met doing that. And just a few years ago, there was no official marker there for that, so the library contacted Senator Yeager. We have to have a senator sponsor your historical marker and so forth, and I think Mr. Powers helped us some on that. And it was a long, drawn-out ordeal because this all came down during COVID. The foundry was shut down and all of these obstacles. But we finally got the historical marker put up there. So if you're 3 miles outside of Jellico and anytime you want to stop by there and pull off and read that little brief history, it's there for you to see. We couldn't put it at the actual wreck site. It's just too dangerous. The state deemed it too dangerous to pull off there. So we put it back at what they call Sandy Beach, which is a few hundred feet north of the wreck site. But still yet, you get the feeling for it. But that was an ordeal. So we're honored to have a little part with getting that marker there. So it's truly an astounding event. I have a saying that they've quit coming now. It's been at least 5 or 6 years since we've had I'd say every survivor of the troop train or every participant is basically gone now because they would be 100 or at least in their late 90s. So we've kind of closed a chapter of history. However, occasionally I'll still have a grandson or a granddaughter or a family member still come and want to see where the troop train wrecked. So it's kind of a drama. It would have been a bigger drama in American history had it not been for all of the much bigger drama going on, like victory in Europe and victory in Japan. But I would often ask my dad, I said, Dad, what was the most effect that train wreck had on you? He said, well, seeing all of those soldiers die right there on the river, he said that really made me want to do my part more than ever for the war effort. So he was 16 when the train wrecked in July of that year. He turned 17 in November. His mother and dad signed for him to go to the U.S. Navy, and soon he was on a destroyer on his way all the way to Tokyo, Japan. So it really touched a lot of people. So that's kind of a story, a troop train wreck, a big event in history.
I don't have a question, but kind of tell us what all's on that table.
Okay, I brought several pictures and the 2 books. There's 2 main books on this. She Jumped the Track by Mr. John P. Asher. Mr. Asher was a railroad president, and he got really interested in the troop train wreck, and he came to High Cliff and spent a lot of time with my father and a lot of locals researching it. This book is sadly out of print. If you find one on eBay or online, they're usually around a couple $100. They're kind of hard to find now. But this is really a neat book. It's got the official ICC, Interstate Commerce Commission, report in it to investigate the wreck. Got a lot of pictures of the local people. Very fascinating book. This one here, this was another fascinating person I've met in my library work. This is by Mr. D. Ray Smith of Oak Ridge, and the way I understand it, he's the official historian of everything Oak Ridge. So I'm honored to have got to meet him and work with him a little bit on his compilation on the wreck, and it's a really neat little book. Got several pictures over here for you to look at. Needless to say, everybody didn't have cell phone cameras back then, and there's not a whole lot of pictures. And then the Army kind of clamped down on some secrecy. And just the other day, I met another interesting fellow. I like meeting interesting people. I don't like meeting dull people in the library. But Mr. Ferguson, some of y'all may know him. I think he told me that he taught auto body repair at the comprehensive. Bruce, okay. He brought this letter over to me, and I'm just going to read it to you. Pretty impressive. And this is from the Army Service Forces, headquarters of the 4th Service Command out of Atlanta, Georgia. And it's dated July 31st, 1944. And this is to Mr. Leonard T. Ferguson at Service Motor Company, Lafayette, Tennessee. Dear Mr. Ferguson, the fine job that you and those who worked with you did in helping to remove the dead and injured from the troop train wreck near Jellico, Tennessee on July 6th gives me deeper appreciation of all the people who make America great. You could have stood idly by as a spectator, but you did your best to alleviate the suffering of the wounded and care for those who were dead. Please accept my personal thanks for all of this. Sincerely yours, F.E.O. UHL, I suppose that Major General, United States Army. So Mr. Ferguson brought his cutting torches up from his auto body shop and worked for several days there, helping get those soldiers out. One more little anecdote I'll tell you. I went to church with Mr. Harold Moon for many years at the Jellico Methodist Church. Harold was a big, strapping volume of a man. He was about 6'6" and about 250. But he wore these hugely, disproportionately thick glasses, okay? He could barely get around. He sang in the choir. He was a really good fellow. He was one-time mayor of Jellico and city judge and city recorder and various things through the years. And the story is, the backstory to that is, Mr. Harold Moon ran a little service station in Jellico as well. And when the troop train wrecked and they needed to cut soldiers out, he grabbed his acetylene torch and headed out there. But one thing he forgot his goggles. And he welded and used his torch all night long with no eye protection. So that is exactly why Mr. Moon ended up with those innately thick glasses for the rest of his life. And it cost him a promising career in either minor league or major league baseball. He was a heck of a pitcher and had some talent and might have went places had he not sacrificed for his country and those other men and cut them out all night long like that. So that's kind of an interesting story too. A lot of local heroes involved. Any other questions?
Hey, thank you, Mark. Did Eddie Archer, did he write a book also about this? I remember something.
His is on the explosion at Jellico, which happened in 1906, another great event in Jellico history.
Oh, okay.
September 21st, 1906, you had to have dynamite to mine all the coal that would be mined at Jellico. 11 tons of it was parked downtown. Nobody knows exactly why, but kablooey. And that was Jellico's first downtown revitalization because it really did live on most of the town. It lived a lot of people. But that's a really good book, The Day the Earth Shook, by Mr. Eddie Archer, fine fellow. There was also a circus setting up in town that day. It had come in by train, and literally, and not figuratively, the animals were knocked out of their cages. So you had elephants and lions and tigers and clowns and all sorts of stuff running around the mayhem of Jellico after it had been leveled. And the story is the next year came back. The circus came back the next year, and a freak snowstorm hit downtown and collapsed their tents and everything. So guess what? That circus never ever came back to Jellico again. But you're welcome to look at any of this stuff. Appreciate you listening to me a little bit. Very interesting. Any other stories you want to tell, Nancy?
Yeah. Keep some them to yourself.
I've talked far too much.
Thank you. Postmark had a play called The Letterbox. And we did a story on a young man who was killed in that wreck, but his watch was misplaced. And so the mother had written a letter to the mayor of the father requesting if they found the watch because his grandfather had given it to him before he ordered that crime. And it was a family heirloom, and so we had that letter, and so we included that. When we do the letterbox plays, we include letters that came actually through the post office, usually, and the stories involved with that. So I found that very intriguing.
That's very intriguing, very interesting. One other little story I thought of, and you can tell me to hush anytime, but I think the farthest person we had connected coming back to the troop train wreck came from Buena Vista, California one day. And he came in as usual and introduced himself and asked if I knew anything about the troop train wreck, and we really got to talking. And he said, yeah, I was sent from Capcroft to some specialized training, and he said I ended up in the 10th Mountain Division, which a lot of them trained out at Mount Rainier in Washington State and so forth. And he said, I was with a fella that you might have heard of when he got wounded. He said, you remember Bob Dole that ran for president of the United States? And I said, yes, sir, I think I've heard of Mr. Dole. He said, well, I was there that day. So those troop train survivors, they went to a lot of places in the world. Very fascinating. Thank you.